G'day, greetings, bonjour, and welcome back. My name is Matthew Barrett, and this is my Mark IV Qrow Weapon tutorial. This is the fourth one I've made, and if you've seen the last one I made, I wasn't 100% happy with the way it came out. It was really bendy and just unstable in general. And that was all down to the materials that I used. I used thin aluminium in the chassis, and for the outer shell I used EVA foam. And EVA foam is good for a lot of things, but when you're doing these sort of dynamic props that require a lot of moving parts, you tend to run into some problems. So with this, the Mark IV, I've used stronger aluminium as a chassis, and I've used a more robust shell. I've used timber this time. But all that, without further ado, let's get on with the build. So first off was the chassis. I wanted something with a high tensile strength, so this time, instead of using a really thin aluminium stripping, I used a 10 by 25mm aluminium rectangular tubing. This acts as the structural integrity of the blade, and it's how the individual sections can hinge back forward into scythe mode. The blade extends over 1 meter with 5 200mm long different sections. I marked down all the different sections onto the blade with a marker, and then drew a shape of the rough cutout of what the joint would look like. Then, using my jigsaw, I then carefully and safely fabricated the joints out of the tubing. And yes, this is safe. Why would you say that? For the outer shell, I tested a few different materials. I started off with plywood, but I really wasn't happy with the finish that was giving off. It was sort of like a timber look to it. So then I tried PVC, and again, that really wasn't what I wanted. I finally settled on MDF, or craft wood, if you will. Now, to make the blade retract, I wanted to do something a little different than what I've done before. I brainstormed for a few days about how I could actually retract all the sections in the blade or the handle. I decided to adapt a type of mechanism called a pantograph mechanism. It's simply put a way to mimic the movement of a pivot over an extended distance. It's the same principle, only in 2 dimensions. I used 5mm stripping to construct the mechanism that pulls the top of the next pivot and pushes the bottom of the blade piece that actually tilts the blade into scythe mode. It kind of looks like this. It took a few days to get the moment ratios just right, but I finally managed to get it all into place, and it worked beautifully. Now it's time for the hilt. Now this is the fun part, the part where it all sort of comes together and where it's all the guts of the whole thing, where it actually transforms. It acts as a base plate that the handle and blade can hinge. The blade hinges forward into scythe mode, into gun mode, and the handle hinges back into scythe mode. To keep the sword upright, instead of using a pin or a bolt, I used a gas strut like you would find in a caravan cupboard. If I apply pressure to the bottom of the blade, the sword will fall forward into gun mode, and then if I let go, it will be forced back into sword mode. The handle, I used 3 different PVC pipes that slide into each other, and then painted them, the other 2 handles, and then I wrapped the handle in burgundy leather to give it a more civilized look. The blade edges were made out of aluminium. The sword scythe has 2 different blades for the sword and the scythe, obviously. You have the regular sword blade, and then the red maroony coloured one that magically materializes when it turns into scythe mode. Rigged up the scythe blade to activate when the sword retracts backwards. I screwed one into the red blade and then placed and drilled a slot that the other end could slide in and out of into position when the blade was retracted. It sounds terribly complicated, but it really isn't that hard. The sword blade was easy. I used some 90-degree angle aluminium stripping to act as an edge, and then I 3D printed some brackets to glue to the blade to keep them in place. Now it was time for painting. I coated the blade with a grey primer and then gave it 2 coats of an aluminium spray paint. I freehanded the decals on the side by pencil and highlighted it with the dark grey water-based acrylic. Now, all that's left was the gears and the hilt. This, I wanted to have some level of movement in there. I couldn't fit a motor into that area since the actual blade and the handle would have taken up all that space, and I had about this much space to work with. So what I did was, I 3D printed a set of gears and attached one of them to the handle. That way, when the handle retracts when going into scythe mode, the gears will turn, and it'll kind of look like it does on the show, where will turn as the sword is retracting, or there is some level of movement. As long as there's movement in the handle, the gears will be turning. And that's it. Then you have your fully formed Qrow scythe. This project has been so much fun. I've had a blast making it. It has taken a little bit longer than I would have expected over the last couple of months. I started it back in, I don't know, it must have been August of last year. But all that aside, still had a blast making it. Thank you all for being so patient with me. Thanks to all those who have come into the channel in the last couple of months. I really appreciate all the support. And I will see you at RTX, or if you're not going to RTX, I will see you in the next video. Thanks again everybody so much for watching. And this is Matthew, signing out.